Hello, friends, and welcome to yet another precious episode of Vision to Vibe, the show where I meet with creative marketing leaders in the B2B space and talk to them about some of their best stories of how they created a vision for themselves, for their clients, for their business, and how they took it all the way to a vibe, a feeling, an experience that resonated with their audience, that had remarkability that people talk about and has echo waves across the internet. That's what we're all about here, baby. And I'm very excited for my guest for this particular episode, which is Taylor Wells. Taylor and I have known each other for a few years now. We have worked on similar clients together. He's into B2B marketing, so am I. Another sort of guy who's gone to school in the greater Boston area and stuff like that. Taylor and I just continue to vibe about the fact that we have a ton of overlap in our networks and in our interests. And Taylor, when you and I were catching up, you told me about some of the most recent projects and some of the new twists and spins and launches you put around your own venture. And I said, this is all gold, man. We should be talking about this and people should be taking notes, because I was getting some good takeaways and some inspiration from it. And I think some other folks here on the line will as well. So thanks for jumping on, man.
Nick, great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Cool. Well, Taylor, as you know, I'm a big music buff, a DJ by trade on the side, and I know that you're into music as well. If I had the rights to do it and I could play any song for free of any copyright infringement concerns, and I could go, ladies and gentlemen, Taylor Wells, what would be the ideal walkout track for you to put you in the right zone?
Great question. Well, whether I'm working out or whether I'm getting ready for a podcast and everything in between, anything Kendrick Lamar is where I go to. And he has obviously made a splash recently. But Euphoria was what I was literally listening to right before I got on to chat with you. He is somebody that has delivered. I aspire to deliver as consistently as he has for decades when it comes to music. And he rarely has a bad track. So you can literally listen to album after album, and I do. Great stuff.
You know, I'm a big fan of hip hop and listened to it a ton growing up, and I was just floored by his performance on the Super Bowl. I was just mesmerized. I thought it was so great. And say what you want. There were some people who criticized it, whatever, but I, as just an appreciator of good hip hop and just great cameramanship and creativeness and just keeping it focused on the lyrics and the vibe again. It was awesome.
Yeah,
I liked it.
Agreed. Yeah, 100%. I think marketers can take a playbook out of Kendrick Lamar's playbook of not only being consistent, right? I think delivering and providing a great, excellent experience, but having a vibe. He literally broke the internet as somebody that's been around for decades, right? He's not new to the scene. It's not like he's whatnot, but whether it's his his infamous shuffle dance that he did that you had people breaking the internet, or whether it's his beef with Drake.
I know.
I think it's interesting. You see performers like that, and something I aspire to is expecting more out of your audience, or expecting your audience to appreciate a next level of complexity. We could talk about maybe even the show.
With you on it. You can take a swing, and they're waiting for it, and they're ready. Go with you on it.
Yeah, I was listening to a conversation with somebody about I forget what podcast it was, but they were talking about Severance, the TV show, right? Another thing that's broken the internet or the world.
Everybody's saying it's a must watch.
It's amazing. I was late to the show too. I was totally late to the show, pun intended. I was I just recently got into it, and I love actually that type of genre, so I can't believe I was so late. But another show or another experience, right, where they up-leveled and they expected the audience. They expected more of the audience, and what I mean by that is they, there was a risk, right, of will people actually get it? Will people actually care? Will people appreciate all the details? And similar to Kendrick Lamar, and I think marketers or go-to-market people is understanding that your market is probably way more intelligent than we give it credit to, and appreciates things like a vibe, or appreciates things like experience way more than we give it credit to. And it's a hard bar to set, right? Severance or even Kendrick Lamar, those are high bars to set. But I think it gives me inspiration to think of hey, how can I up-level my work and understand that my audience will hopefully appreciate the extra effort, the details, and the overall experience that I'm making for them.
Oh, let me riff on this with you a little bit more here. This was just supposed to be about our appreciation of music, but you're so right, Taylor. Another thing I've noticed, to your point, is that even if your creative swing is only going to resonate and with a small group of your audience, and they're like, I'm going to go with you on this and put myself out there and respond to what you're doing or whatever, there's still a silent majority that at least enjoys watching the minority vibe with your swing or whatever that might be. However that shows up, people commenting back to you, sharing it out, interacting, jumping up on stage, like whatever the format is, you almost can't lose, even if you can hook that small group that goes, yes, I get it, I'm in, I'll participate, I'll reciprocate. The rest of the group, it's not that they're going to go, oh, forget it, I can't connect to this, I'm out of here. They're going to go, sweet, I'll watch them and see what happens. You're still going to keep the entire audience.
100%.
With any swing you take, I think.
I love that. And even just the effort. I think people appreciate effort and thought. Like, actually, I went to a Kendrick Lamar show, not to continue talking about Kendrick Lamar, but
people love
the
him.
first, yeah, cool. The first thing I went to this show, and like you literally have like 10,000 people singing along to his songs, and these people are such fans. And he got up on stage and he said, I want this to be the best effing show you've ever been to in your life. Yeah. And he brought that energy, right? He brought that enthusiasm. He brought that intent. And I think intent is a big part of a lot of things. Like, you may not resonate with everyone. And in the world of B2B, we don't actually have these massive audiences where we have to get a tremendous amount of appeal, right? Where we have to get everyone bought in. We actually have usually pretty small audiences. And I think the push to more niche audience is usually always a best strategy. We can definitely talk about that more too.
No, we're getting into it. Yeah, definitely.
But finally, thinking through this idea of, resonating with that niche audience and resonating in a way that's different. And obviously, whether it's Severance or whether it's, Kendrick Lamar, they're resonating with large audiences, and that's even better in some ways. But in B2B, I think we have a special opportunity that we really only have to connect with a few amount of people. So let's make it count.
Yeah, let's double click on that, Taylor. You're right. So in the subject of B2B marketing, which is a space you and I have spent many years working on, we've discussed that you and I are also interested in using like event-driven, ways to do that, to do podcast-driven, to do content-driven, community-driven growth, and that type of thing. What are some of your actually, let me do this, Taylor, if you wouldn't mind. Take us a step back, because some folks don't know you. Let them know a little bit about what they should know about you in terms of your credentials as a B2B marketer. How did you get into this space? Why should people care? And can you get them primed up a little Kendrick Lamar style about why it's going to be an awesome podcast episode to hear you talk about some of these things?
Oh, well, you already set me up for failure. Yeah, no. Can we just play Kendrick Lamar and we can just
do that? And we'll just nod along. Be like, you see, it's that.
Give the people what they want. Yeah. Yeah. No, thanks for asking. So my journey is a little untraditional in some ways. Well, maybe not, because a lot of folks end up in B2B and in a weird, in a weird world. So I've always been like an entrepreneur at heart, and so I've always gravitated towards startups and the energy in startups. And what I found working in startups was marketing, customer acquisition was always like one of the number one challenges. And so I ended up working really where I cut my teeth, for lack of a better expression, was I was working for a managed service provider. It was actually my brother-in-law's company, an MSP, IT cybersecurity.
Yep, big space. Yep.
And and so this was in really when I kind of jumped into B2B was in 2015. Excuse me, and I started. He was just like, we need more customers. So I was like, okay, I'll figure out more customers. And so I was wearing a dual hat. I was wearing a sales marketing hat. And as I got into it, I realized, well, one of the number one problems isn't so much sales. It's not so much like closing the deals.
Right.
Even though that's hard, there's a challenge there, and there's a level of experience, and I can always be a better salesperson. But actually the hardest part was marketing and actually getting people's attention and getting people to join a meeting. And so I in that role, I had to really figure out, especially as an MSP that honestly did not have a differentiated product, was in a saturated market.
That's a challenge. Big budget. Managed service providers can be commoditized.
Totally. 100%. Yep. Bootstrapped, commoditized, saturated market. Great people, great end result, but not differentiated when it comes from a market standpoint. So I had to get really creative with how do we differentiate our marketing. And I remember I was like walking, it was like a couple years into the role, I was walking, talking to somebody that wasn't even in the B2B space. And they're like, are you doing virtual events? Are you doing some sort of webinar? And I'm like, well, we're a local marketing company. How would that work? And we actually ended up pivoting, ended up doing virtual events and attracting people from all around the country. So we actually ended up becoming a national service provider. Bunch of cool things happened. But really what I learned was how do we actually get people's attention and how do we build trust, and not only get people's attention, but how we can then convert that into trust building and actually get them to come on a call when we're just a small little MSP in Portland, Oregon. So yeah, I learned a lot about that. I fell in love with virtual events, webinars, and the power of building relationships at scale through that. Fast forward, I ended up working a later stage tech company as a senior director of demand gen. And then after that, I ended up becoming a consultant and actually got laid off from that. I won't skip over the juicy details. Got laid off.
It happened to me in the past.
Yeah,
Yep.
Yeah. 2023 was a rough year for a lot of folks, and the last couple of years for sure.
Yeah, especially B2B around tech and stuff like that, for sure.
Totally.
People can relate. I know. Yeah.
Totally. And so I ended up, I had a network on LinkedIn, actually mostly because of all the marketing I'd done for the MSP. Go figure, all these people have been following me because they're like, oh, wow, he's might could help us, right? He's helping this one MSP. And so I ended up getting some cybersecurity companies reaching out to me and did a bunch of fractional work, consulting work, and did that for a couple of years. And as an entrepreneur at heart, I was always trying to figure out, okay, how do I scale this? How do I build a business out of this?
And I'll quickly interject. That's where you and I got a chance to catch up, and you inspired me,
Totally.
Taylor, even before I went out on my own here. And I was asking the same thing. How are you doing it? How's it work? How do you balance stuff with clients? How do you price and package? And it's been fun to watch you in the public sphere, like, put all that together and to put together your public go-to-market motions on social and stuff. It's been cool to see that.
Nick. I appreciate that. Yeah. It's definitely been a learning curve. Like the consulting fractional route, I definitely was riding a wave of fractional consultants, and I still think it's a great, gig and you can fit a great need in an organization that's looking to maybe not hire the headcount and looking or not quite there yet. And so, but it's definitely its own thing. I've learned so much. We probably have a whole podcast on what I've learned from doing consulting and fractional work and all that fun stuff. And but I was always at the heart of like, hey, how do I take my skills? How do I take my passion, my interest, and grow something out of that? And I tried to do some software development and really didn't land with anything that was good. I tried to figure out how could I scale my services, and that's its own little journey. And then what I came across was this kind of combination of figuring out my skill set, which and my passions, which were obviously go-to-market stuff like sales, marketing, demand gen, go-to-market, and cybersecurity. And on top of that, community. So I've actually, over the past year, I've been working on developing a community in the cybersecurity space for go-to-market leaders. And out of a need for it, like, hey, I'm in this space, and there's no community for us. There's some great communities out there that are more just for B2B, and they're more generic. Shout out to Pavilion, and there's a bunch of communities I've been a part of that I've gotten a ton of value out of, but they're not specific to the one industry. And like we talked about earlier, not only when it comes to my own career development, right? Like, let's say this community in 6 months or a year doesn't grow to be its own thing. I'll have built relationships. I told my wife this. I was like, as we get into this, like, my goal is obviously to build a great, thriving company and to scale it and all that fun stuff. But if not, I'll hopefully never have to look for another job again, right? Because I've built a community, I've built my tribe, I found the people that we have common interests, common goals, common challenges. And so my goal is ultimately to obviously create a community that provides tons of value, helps folks go to market better in the cybersecurity space, makes the world more secure, all that fun stuff. But along the way, it's also, an opportunity to ultimately, how do I get better at my craft, right? How do I network with the right people? And it's fascinating. I gone public about a month ago, and I'm already learning. My acceleration of my own personal learning has skyrocketed. What I read is different. Who I'm talking to is different. Just by positioning myself as, hey, I'm building this niche community, and I'm looking for people like me, and it's just fascinating and it's scary, right? Because me, even just 3 or 4 months ago, I know I'm going to say no to opportunities. I know I have to say no to so many things to say yes to this one thing. And it's scary, right? Because I'm putting all my eggs in one basket. And I think that phrase is actually so maybe appropriate in certain contexts, but in general, especially for me, has been such a damaging end for me because I've
Can't
been trying to do so many
eggs in
different
one
things.
basket. Never good.
Totally.
Yeah. That's
I've been trying to do consulting. I've been trying to maybe do some startups. I've been trying to do this community over here. I've been trying to do a podcast. I've been trying to, and I'm trying to hedge my bets, right? And sometimes that's okay to explore and to try new things and to figure out what you like. And but if I were to, this community idea I had 3 years ago. This community I had actually, when I worked at that MSP, almost a decade ago, right? Where I was like, I love cybersecurity. I love go-to-market. How do I go deeper in that? And instead of like listening to that call, instead of like almost, I'm a biggest fan of sci-fi, and Dune is a popular movie and or book.
Love me some Dune.
Yeah, and I don't know if you remember Paul Atreides' statement of his terrible purpose, and it's this concept really of. I'm actually a Christian, so I'll use something from my faith of like Jesus says, pick up your cross. It's like this burden, right? And it's this burden, but it's also this responsibility and this passion. So like on one level, it's scary.
To focus in, pick the choice, make it happen, do the scary thing, and let the other stuff fall by the wayside if need be.
Totally. Yeah. Yep, 100%. And it's that kind of the idea of this mix of purpose, but there's also an element of sacrifice, an element of scariness, an element of you don't know where this is going to go, right? Yeah. And responsibility. And so,
which brings the adventure though too, to me, because I can relate 100%. To everything you're talking about, Taylor. For those folks who followed me and they know that I've done something similar going out on my own. I've always had an entrepreneurial bent, which I tried to flex through various different companies, but ultimately felt I needed to put myself out there and do my own thing to start to focus in on that. Also kind of spread myself out with a few different go-to-market motions and stuff like that. Constant wondering if I'm focusing on the right thing or spreading myself too thin, but can also very much relate to what you were saying earlier about once you finally just kind of pick a few keywords like cybersecurity, go to market, as a community, suddenly it's so much easier for you to see what's out there and to filter things, and so much easier for everybody else to be like, oh yeah, Taylor, cybersecurity community, right? Connect, right? Nick, MC, webinar, like whatever, that type of thing. They can make these connections easier when we focus and niche down a little bit. Is that what you're finding as well? 100%.
And I love your thought on this because I think it's actually changed a lot over the past even 5 years. I think like with COVID, the rise of like globalization, the rise of everything being remote, has created a ton of opportunity, right? You can service people from all around the world. Yeah. You can, there's all sorts of things. But the problem is now everyone can service everyone. Everyone can create a product. Now you have AI creating, products very easily or much easier than before. So I think what's interesting is that maybe 10 or 20 years ago, you could be a generalist, right? You could dabble in multiple things. You could, mostly maybe because your market was smaller and you didn't have access to people around the world. But, what's so interesting as the world gets bigger or as your opportunity gets bigger, it's counterintuitive to think you can service everyone. And when developing a great product and developing something that really serves people, this takes a lot of work and a lot of effort. And I have a wife and a 9-month-old baby. I'm not planning on working 80 to 100 hours a week. Hats off to those CEOs and those entrepreneurs that do that. Yeah. But
hats off to you for focusing and prioritizing just what matters in your life, period.
Thank you.
Whatever that is. And family, I think, is obviously something even those hardworking CEOs and C-suite folks putting in that time could also still say that's the right thing to keep that in priority.
Yeah, thank you. And I agree. And I think there's, it's each their own. And everything is honestly like, let's look at B2B marketing. It's way harder than you probably think it is. Oh, yeah. And growing a business is way harder than you think it is. Creating a great product story you think it is. So you have to figure out, I think I'm learning and painfully learning that I have to say no and become really good and make my product really unique, make my product really good, make my marketing unique, etc. And I think a lot of that even comes back to creating a vibe, right? Like you can't create a vibe for everyone unless you really are going to be either have a ton of money or a ton of time. I tell this to especially founders of companies. If you want to grow, you either need a ton of time or a ton of money. If you want to grow fast and you want to grow, maybe at the expectation that you currently have, or
that's why so many
reasonable.
Firms seek out venture funding. They want to go fast and they need to accelerate how they're doing that through people, through programs, whatever it is. Right.
Totally.
100%. So this is great. Listen, entrepreneurial-minded listeners, solo entrepreneurs, consultants. I hope you're leaning in, folks, as we're getting into the depths of two guys here who have walked this path, and Taylor's a year and a half ahead of me on this, and I'm sure you're nodding up and down a little bit and you can relate. So Taylor, we're following your journey. You're like, I need to focus this down. I need to have a point of view. I need to go to market the way I've taught my clients to do it. And you had something called like the Selfless Advantage. Do you want to tell us a bit more about that, how you came up with that, and how is that part of your attempt to kind of like figure out how to productize and create a go-to-market perspective?
Thanks for asking. So yeah, Selfless Advantage is something that I don't even know how I coined the term, but it kind of hit me one day, probably in the shower or on a walk, the two best places I get ideas.
Amen.
Yep. And so the Selfless Advantage is this concept of, so I'll take a step back a little bit of, and if there's folks that are in the cybersecurity space, you'll definitely resonate with this, is that empathy is a term that I think we use a lot in go-to-market and marketing, like be empathetic, right? Put yourselves in the buyer's shoes. And I actually just looked it up earlier. Totally. Yeah. And it's great. I think we're so right. Like we're usually, unless you're in MarTech or sales tech, you're usually not the buyer, right? You're usually not, you've never been in the buyer's shoes. And especially if you're in like the space I'm in, where I've never been a CISO, I've never been an IT leader.
Right.
I have to work overtime to try to understand them, to try to put myself in their shoes, right? But what's really interesting about the word empathy, if you look it up, I've never found a definition that has any sort of action after the feeling of empathy. It's all about the process of getting yourselves in the buyer's shoes,
right?
Which is step one, I think. And I think actually the best salespeople, marketers or whatever, are super empathetic, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're serving the best interest of their customers and or prospects. And in the cybersecurity world, in the cybersecurity world, I'll give a great example. Some of the best cybersecurity criminals out there are super empathetic because they and then they ultimately use empathy, right? They figure out how to get inside somebody's head. They figure out what their pain points are. They figure out what their challenges are, and they use that to then manipulate people. And then what I call is weaponizing empathy, right? And actually, in the sales and marketing world, I feel like we do this too, right? We take empathy, and instead of using it to serve people, we use it to sell more products. And there's nothing wrong with selling products or services. Don't get me wrong. But what I think is there's actually something better when you're in your go-to-market strategy, which how do you use go-to-market, marketing, sales, every form of your distribution to actually provide value. And this is like my next definition is kind of pre-customer impact. So how do you provide impact before they're a customer, right? And I think thought leadership is a great example of this in the marketing world, right? You're providing thought leadership. The best B2B marketing content provides value beforehand, not just value in the sense of educating them about your product, but value in the sense of solving your product. And back to the weaponizing empathy, if you look up even the definition of a psychopath, which I don't want to offend anybody, the definition of a psychopath, if it literally goes through, is they have a lack of empathy. A lack of natural empathy, right? Of it, whatever the chemicals are going on, but they know how to use empathy to manipulate people, right? And I think as buyers, once again, back to what we talked about at the very beginning of our conversation, like I think if we can treat buyers a little, raise the bar a little bit and realize that they're probably a lot more intelligent, they're probably a lot more self-aware, they're probably a lot more aware of what's going on, and realize that all the manipulative tactics work less and less every single year as every channel gets more saturated, as every buyer has more options. And as we're kind of just tired of it, right? We're tired of the selfish.
Right. All the marketing
empathy
kind of hits us in the middle and not in a high-minded place because people don't.
Totally.
The marketers who are doing these go-to-market tactics are kind of regressing to the mean. They're just kind of like, let's be a little bit edgy, but still stick with the best practice that I can justify to my boss or whatever it is, and it just kind of all hits us like here, and we're just like, seen this before, seen it. It's all kind of noise, and when a Kendrick Lamar level style swing happens, or someone just makes a creative commitment to a different point of view or something a little bit more higher-minded, you're kind of like, oh, I understand. Yeah, push me a little bit. Like use empathy a little bit more creatively, as you're almost saying.
100%. Yeah, exactly. And use it as a means to serve people. And this is where the selfless advantage comes in, right?
Yeah.
And the selfless advantage is kind of like, not trying to be tongue-in-cheek, but a little bit. And this idea of, it's very counterintuitive. Like, there's no departments in the entire organization that's more self-focused, I think, than go-to-market teams. By definition, Our goals are usually leads, pipeline, revenue, and those are all really self-focused things. And if you talk about like mental health, or even you talk about the satisfaction, job satisfaction, or actually, you know, and I hope to write a book about this because I think I have a lot of interesting ideas that tie in with even Jeff Bezos. I don't know if you're familiar with his missionary concept. Mm-hmm. So have you heard of this concept?
Yes, but just at a high level, and please take us through.
I probably only know at the same level as you, but for the audience, this idea that, you know, there's mercenaries and there are missionaries, and missionaries is an interesting word to use. Kind of a loaded word.
Right. But evangelist, another loaded term, but
yeah, totally. But his whole concept is you want to hire missionaries, not mercenaries. Mercenaries are people that are just in it for the short term. Missionaries actually believe in the mission of the organization. They believe in the values of the organization. They believe in helping people and actually ultimately serving people. And so I think go-to-market teams, we could talk about incentives, right? Drive this, I think, very short-term minded. We could also talk about how all our metrics are just serving the company. And once again, I'm not against, you know, my whole career has been built on how do we drive pipeline, how do we drive revenue. Like, none of that's bad. Mm-hmm. But I think it's created us very self-focused. And I think even my own personal career, the minute I kind of figured out this idea of like, oh, actually, the best tactics are not ones that are super selfish, right? That you don't just go in for the kill, asking for the meeting. You actually have to build trust and provide value and build a relationship. Selfless things, right? Things that cost you something, and actually cost us. I think that's the other thing too. It's not that actually, that's where that pre-customer impact, right? Where we're actually thinking about go-to-market as a product and thinking about it as a loss leader. And actually in the B2C world, you see this all the time. You see, you know, whether it's samples or they give away a free product or whatever. And I think there's a lot of work, and actually some of my best tactics have been, you know, even just being really tactical for the audience, right? Thinking through of like, okay, if we're a SaaS platform and we have a professional service arm, how do we maybe give away some of that professional service arm as a loss leader pre-customer to get them into our ecosystem, provide value, build that trust, and then solve more problems with them through our software. Yeah. It's even easier with service companies.
Members of the professional services team and get a fraction of their time to be in like pre-sales motion. You factor their comp in and their job description to do that, so nobody's like sticking their neck out. Because I could tell people are listening, that'd be their first pushback. Like, those professional service people are in constant demand. We can't ever have enough of them. They're not very scalable. We surely can't just pull them off and do sales stuff. It's like, okay, no, just think of it as a different motion, a slice of it, like a hypothesis, and we're going to try to get a return on that person's time plus the salesperson's time, and we're going to see how we can get a higher conversion rate, a larger deal size, or something like that, right? You're not saying
100%
water down or, you know, like freak out the professional services team. We're just saying, but maybe take some of that, however you want to position it or pitch it, and put it into the process, add more value.
100%. And I think if you're a venture-backed company and you have tons of money to burn on marketing and sales, and I always love looking at publicly traded SaaS companies, to looking at their metrics. Yeah. And even in my community, we're going to start developing some metric, or just, you know, analyzing all the publicly traded SaaS companies and looking at how much they spend on marketing and sales. Because if you look at it, it's crazy. It's crazy for publicly traded companies that have tons of brand awareness. Let's just look at Salesforce, right? Salesforce, they're, you know, the number one CRM platform in the world. Maybe Oracle is, you know, maybe competes with them a little bit on that, but number one sales, you know, CRM. They have crazy brand awareness. They have crazy market saturation, and
Super Bowl ads.
Yeah, totally. And yet they spend, you know, it's gone down a little bit over the past couple of years with everyone's pullback on marketing and sales, but they still spend 35% of their revenue on marketing and sales. So, you know, I think they're a $20 billion year in revenue, or whatever it is, 40 billion. I forget the numbers exactly, but either way, they're spending billions and billions and billions of dollars on getting new customers. And so not only are we all competing with that, right? We're just competing in the noise of the market, but you have these players that are way further ahead than any company I've ever worked for when it comes to brand awareness and market dominance. Oh, yeah. And yet they still have to spend that much money. And so when you're looking at creative ways, right, to think about how to reduce CAC and ultimately drive more pipeline, we have to get really creative. And I think one of those ways is to like provide a service or provide some version of your product in advance. And PLG is a big part of this too. Like I didn't come up with these ideas. Like product-led growth is a very similar concept of how do you reduce the time to value, right? Give that value to them as quickly as possible. And I think there's a ton of ways you can reduce time to value. You can do it through building relationships, and you can do it through providing content and value and reducing that time to value, right? Don't wait until they become a customer to deliver value. Deliver value now, and chances are they're going to come back to you. In my experience is you keep providing value, they're going to want you to do more, right? And they're going to want you to solve a bunch more problems.
Look at what Google has done with their like Google Ads specialist. If you're spending any money with Google Ads, there'll be somebody saying, hey, here to help you look at your account, give you some free advice, and guess what? Good for Google. Probably give you confidence, spending a little bit more, doubling down on the campaign, launching a new campaign while you're at it. But they're there first and foremost to help and advise, but it's very much part of the motion to say, well, if this was helpful, you're feeling confident now, why don't we keep the budget going? Keep spending here, right? Nothing wrong with that. Everybody wins in those scenarios. But I'm just saying it's been done. It's being done.
100%. Yeah, great example.
So can you take what you're telling us then, Taylor, and talk to us about how did you use some of this, the Selfless Advantage, let's say, to put together this new community, this new cybersecurity community? Can you tell us if that's sort of the vision to vibe case you want to take us through? An example of how you planned it out and said, okay, I'm focusing down on this. Let's tie it all together. I'm going to focus down on this motion, this format, community-driven for cybersecurity professionals. How did you start to use that Selfless Advantage and make your vision into a vibe?
Yeah, great question. And it's still a work in the progress, but my ultimate, like where I'm at today and where my continued intention is going to be is how do I provide way more value, right, than they expect in some level, and how do I exceed their expectations when it comes to value? Yes. And how do I create something that is really unique for them, right? And that's part of like me, the empathy, right? Like I got to be in it. Like I'm still doing fractional work on the side in a cybersecurity company, right? Because I want to continue to like, how do I continue to be in the mind and of my buyer, of my audience? And so there's that empathy, step number 2. And then the selfless part is how do I just ultimately exceed their expectations? So whether it's through our content, right, and through the programming and through the organization, whether it's doing, things that I don't think anyone else has done, like we're tracking, thousands of cybersecurity companies' job boards, and we're analyzing what jobs and creating basically the largest database of cybersecurity go-to-market jobs that no one else has, right? Like, sweet. I don't have to do that. I could do the inbound where everyone just sends me job postings, right, at your company. But I want to be like, hey, how do I actually create something that's like way better than any other job board out there, super unique to my audience? So that's one example. Other examples are like hyper niche, function-based content that's like, hey, if you're a field CISO at a cybersecurity company, is there a place, is there a community for you? Is there content for you? And so I think it's part of like understanding all the personas of your audience, but then also how do we ultimately drive, more value and just do it better than everyone else to some degree. And I also think the vibe part of it, which is so interesting in this world of like, there's a term vibe marketing, which we can talk a little bit about. That's on LinkedIn right now. There's cool. Also, I think there's this idea of vibe just in general, even in the political world we're seeing where the connection, to our connection to folks or connection to anyone is they create an experience. They create this feeling ultimately, and they create this connection, and it's that vibe, right? And I think Gen Z has definitely like popularized this concept, I think, in a lot of ways, but it's also a trickle effect above too. And I think experience is part of it too, is another great word for it. But it's a feeling you get, right? And in B2B marketing, like I always am like, how do I make the feeling, the experience better? But it's hard too. And then there's the other term, vibe marketing, that's on LinkedIn a lot, and that's more about it's a evolution of vibe coding, which is basically another version of GTM engineering. So it's a GTM engineering. Everyone knows what that is, which is basically like using automation, using AI to engineer your outbound and your go-to-market stuff. And Clay has been kind of probably a big influence in that. Yeah. But vibe marketing is an extension of that.
Kind of feeds into itself.
Totally. And part of that's okay. I think part of that works, right, to some extent. And I'm all about using AI or automation or whatever to make the experience better. But what I think we fall short, and where I think vibe marketing is, maybe if you're a PLG company where you have like super transactional, you have a ton of data, you have a low touch, frictionless experience. Sure, maybe you can engineer this perfect customer journey. But what I found, the further a market you go, the every organization is so different. Every customer journey is so different, and so to think you can engineer an experience that is that every buying committee is so unique and so different, I think is maybe eventually we'll get there with AI and whatnot, but you also just don't have enough data. I don't think you don't have the law the law of statistics on your side when you have small amounts of data. Even looking at like Google's acquisition of Wiz, like Wiz, it's fastest growing software company in the world, fastest growing this, fastest growing that. And they actually did it with a very small amount of customers. They picked a niche. They went like Fortune 100. Interesting, going back to saying no to everyone else and just focusing on a very specific market. And to think that they could vibe market that audience or GTM, go to market engineer, GTM engineer that market, I think is a little. I don't know. I don't think it works like that in the mid-market or enterprise space. But so yeah, I think vibe marketing is interesting because I think it's actually a great concept. I think it's actually mislabeled though, and it's not. I think creating a vibe, creating an experience.
I agree, mislabeled.
And authenticity, right? I think is a really popular term, right? And I think when you create a vibe, I haven't really thought this through or researched this fully, but there's something about creating something that's authentic, right? Something about the connection you're making, the experience you're making. It doesn't feel contrived. It doesn't feel, and it does feel authentic. And that's another term that I think is like, everyone's craving for authenticity. Everyone's craving for something real. And I think that's another thing that's really affecting the B2B marketing space is authenticity, and also just affecting go-to-market in general. Is that, people are they're not connecting with the brands. They're not connecting with the people because it feels contrived. It feels selfish. It feels ultimately vibeless.
Well, let's unpack a few things that you just shared there in this great run of thought there, Taylor. One was around communities. I agree. You called out two things. One is that getting the community to aggregate and benchmark information in almost like a proprietary, very niche way is like super effective, I think. We're a group. Let's all source what the group is doing. Great tactic, and then also giving them like hyper niche content. You risk nothing because it's for the small group. And so therefore a niche content that's only relating to a small number of people that are in this group just makes a ton of sense. And it doesn't end up falling flat or have some differentiated expectations. Like this didn't blow up on LinkedIn. It never was meant to be. It's meant to resonate with 10 people. And by the way, that's still amazing leverage to be able to influence 10 people in an hour that I usually spend, because I've been in sales and stuff like that as well, with one person, right? So I loved those 2 points you made. And then I do agree with you that this idea that, that we've seen going around LinkedIn about vibe marketing, we think is a bit of a mislabel. Vibe being a feeling, sort of a mood, and it's being used as sort of a way of like engineering, like growth hacking almost, it feels a little bit like.
100%.
And I think what you're also saying, and I agree, is that that's not really what like ignites a brand in the imagination of a buying committee or a company saying, we need to be more like them. We need to potentially adopt their type of approach. That's because there's thoughtfulness in the go-to-market approach. It's, yes, sure, they have infrastructure and plumbing and stuff like that, but that's not the main star of what was so great about the experience. Somebody had high empathy with the audience, designed a remarkable experience that maybe isn't anything that audience would have expected. Whoa, there's a vibe in here. Like people don't often say, well, this wasn't the vibe I expected, or how is the vibe? You know what I mean? They don't, but they know it when they feel it and they see it. It's something that kind of washes over them unexpectedly as they step into a room, 100%. They log on, they access or whatever it is. It's about, a machine doesn't produce the feeling. Humans getting together. I think music is a huge facet of that. Creativity, the arts, visuals, entertainment creates vibes, not speeds and feeds and APIs and stuff like that. That stuff's going to capture all the stuff quickly and efficiently and track and aggregate and let people flow through. But that does not generate the vibe. That is simply enabling the vibe to go somewhere, which you brought up
100%.
several minutes ago. Often empathy just stops at, oh, we understand them. We've connected with them.
Yeah.
But this is where perhaps vibe marketing, as it's being defined on LinkedIn, can latch in is, well, okay, once we actually create using creative swings a la Kendrick or Lamar to get people to go, oh my gosh, you guys are thoughtful. You guys care. You guys get me. You get me so much you knew what I was already expecting and you went beyond, which is amazing. And then you created a system that's easy for me to act now, whatever that is. Then fine, whatever this vibe marketing part can lock in. But it's quite simply to reduce friction in taking action after we've established empathy and entertained and inspired and engaged
100%.
that person.
I love it, and I think what you're hitting on, and if I'm hearing it sounds like what you're hitting on is there's almost, I think there's this intention about what we're looking to achieve with growth hacking or vibe marketing or GTM engineering or any of these things, where if your goal is to serve people, provide value, build a relationship, build trust, help somebody, create a great experience, create a vibe, how you do it, doesn't really matter. I think, whether you're using AI, whether you're using
and gusto, like just
totally, yeah. And I think all these tools are means and end. I think that's where even automation, right? Or automation, there was automation and there was AI, and they're in some ways we're using them very similarly, where we're thinking we can engineer our way through things, or engineer our way to revenue. When in all reality, I think if your goal is revenue, I think it's actually a missed goal in some way. I think our goal should be creating a great experience, creating that trust, providing value, and that will lead to revenue. But I think just it's the misdirection, or maybe the intention behind it is just lacks, I think, what you need to actually win in the market. When I found what you need to win in the market is I've always won when I've outgave my competitors pre-customer. When I have showed up with that intention to how do I outserve them? How do I out-hustle them? How do I outgive them pre-customer, right? And I don't have to have that best product in the world. I don't have to have the most unique product in the world. Obviously, those things are great. And if you can do that, great. Please have the best product in the world. It makes everything easier, right? But most of us don't. And in a very commoditized world, we're not the number one. We don't have the brand awareness. Most companies I've worked for is you're competing against the folks that have that market dominance. And so I think that the intention is we can use all these things. All these things are great. They're all tools, but I think the intention of how you use them, I think is critical, because you can create, if you think you can create a perfect nurture workflow or nurture email that's just going to convert people to buy. I think once again, you create a perfect email that just provides a ton of value, and then automate the heck out of that. Sure, use AI to make it better. Use AI to simplify. Use AI, whatever. But I think it's once again those tools. And then I will say, whether it's vibe marketing or GTM engineering, I'm realizing my favorite marketing tactics, B2B marketing tactics, go-to-market tactics, any sort of strategy, are things that are really hard to engineer. And actually, they're things that are really based upon humans. So I'll go through the list. Founder-led growth, using your founder to grow. Community-led growth, we're talking about that. I'm building a community. Partnerships, strategic partnerships. Now, you've worked a bunch in that space.
Yes.
Awesome space, an amazing place to. Every company I've worked in, the more strategic partnerships we get, it's just a net positive, and CAC goes down, sales cycles are better. Employee advocacy, right? Enabling your employees to be advocates, being missionaries, not mercenaries. Getting customer advocacy, right? Getting your customers to advocate for you. Content, right? These are things that content's a little less. You can sort of engineer that, but people-led content, right? Like events and podcast and all those things, I think, are things that are all really based on people. So I'm like, relationships are, tried and true. Like, my dad, who's a financial advisor, would have, said that's always been the case, right? And folks that are maybe have a couple more gray hairs than us would say that's always been the case, right? Relationships. And I think actually with AI and with, this market saturation, globalization, the cost of raising money is higher. All these things have made it harder for us to go to market. I think the things that are the last moat is really people, I think. And actually, I've had this concept. I'm still working through a thesis, but are you familiar with Dunbar's number?
Yes, I know it, but it being end of the day, it doesn't exactly.
It's all good. Yeah, it's basically a concept, and a bunch of people have written about this, like Malcolm Gladwell and whatnot, about it's this concept that tribes originally kind of maxed out about 150
max number
people.
Of connections you can have before
Yep. And so I think actually like Dunbar's number is almost our last moat, right? How can I build relationships with customers, strategic partners, employees, whoever the ecosystem is, before everyone else, right? And if I can build those relationships, people only have so many relationships. And so it's actually this last like real gold mine of moat, and everything else I think can support this, right? Like whether it's ads, whether it's, vibe marketing and engineering a perfect workflow, whether it's, GTM engineering, right? Where you're creating a perfect outbound sequence or whatever. All these things can serve, I think, this ultimate purpose of building relationships. It kind of sucks because building relationships takes a lot of work and energy and a lot of intention and a lot of thought and care. I wish it was easier than that, but I think even like content, right? Like if you can integrate relationships to it, right? I think that's why even webinars or virtual events, and I know you do a bunch of work in that space, are so powerful, is because you have this combination of thought leadership, you have this combination of community, you have this combination of a personality or a founder or person you're making a connection with. It's tapping
and some
all those
entertainment, some serendipity, some unexpected. This is live. What could happen? And I was just emceeing a webinar a few hours ago for HubSpot's top solutions partner in North America, and we were doing polls where me and the speakers were ready to customize and pivot what we were going to say next based on what they said in the poll. We asked clear things. Are you using this or using that? What feature or area of this topic are you the most interested in? And we were all watching and anticipating to see where the breakdown was and what people chimed in the poll so that we could adjust and double down on certain sound bites and dump other questions. I'm sitting there going, we need to dump this question because most everybody's saying that they're already covered on that area. So that can be fun. The fun aspect to your point about doing a live gathering like that.
And it's, I think, too, about live virtual events. And I love how you're integrating insights, you're integrating participation. Yeah. There's so many cool things you're creating, but you're also creating a vibe, right? Of like, oh wow, this is like not only live, but things go wrong. And I think the authenticity, like I've tried to lean more into my idiosyncrasies and my humor and just me as a person, right? Because I think there's an element of that. There's only one of me out there. There's only one of me with my DNA. And so maybe that's a differentiator, right? And so I think us leaning into that and leaning into that experience. And I think there's a lot there.
Yeah, I've often said people rarely get access into how you think. And we have this golden opportunity now with the platforms that we have and almost the expectation that it's okay. The community wants us to post and publish. Everybody's making a video now and putting it on LinkedIn. Like it's what you're supposed to do, and people are starting YouTube channels and stuff like that. We've been talking about vibe marketing and a lot about engineering and stuff. And I know that's intimidating for many people, especially the creatives in the audience. But here's the good news is that YouTube and LinkedIn and all these other platforms, they've already vibe marketed the platform for us. The only thing it's missing is you. And people who give a shit about you and how you think and what you're making an effort at doing and what your niche is and what community you're trying to be an evangelist for and be a part of. We just have to show up. And honestly, Taylor, I think that is a big part of my own mission is I'll take the stage because that's what I've been born and bred to do, but I'm doing it so that I can inspire others and create a stage for others and to shine a light on others. And whether it's just simply you chiming in on a poll or you jumping on a podcast with me like this or co-presenting or co-creating something, I'm a very people-oriented person and authenticity, that protects you. Like we are now in a stage where it's okay to be raw, to make mistakes, to flub, to take a creative swing. We've been talking about this whole episode. So it's just a golden age, I feel like, to be expressing yourself, finding out what it is that you truly are passionate about. And back to your early origin story, you don't have to start it by leaving your company like I did. Or you don't have to wait till somebody gets laid off like you and I have been in the past. You could just be building it now on the side. There's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. Finding out what you're into. So this has been an awesome inspiration, man. I put you up to this and you said you were willing to do it. So let's give it a shot. I'd love to give you a lightning round of just a few fun questions.
Let's do it.
You're definitely an extemporaneous guy like me, so let's just see what your takes are on some unexpected questions, but just some fun stuff.
Do it.
So let's see. I want to start with First of all, I told you about this at the top. What's a live concert? Maybe the last like live one you went was this Kendrick Lamar one.
Yeah, great. My last concert was actually Big Thief.
Big Thief. Okay.
Yep.
And then what is a show that you're watching right now? Maybe it's, like you said, Severance, or is there another one that you're really getting into?
I just watched Severance. That was amazing. And I'm now watching Silo, which is another Apple TV show, post-apocalyptic, sci-fi.
I gotta get Apple TV, man. I thought I could avoid it, but there's just another streaming service I gotta
I know, right?
Man.
Oh,
all right.
My wife and I, like every month we go through our streaming services, like, okay, which one are we gonna delete this month? And we're like in this like constant game of like bringing one on and then deleting one, and then we forget, of course. And they're like, why are we still have that one? We're not watching that one at all.
Well, we can all relate. I got some more questions here for you. So, what's one of the first apps you end up looking at in the morning? Well, we know it's not good to look at it when you're getting out of bed, right? But let's say sometime in the morning, the healthy part of the morning to look at an app. What do you usually flip into?
I usually go to, so I've recently deleted all like Slack and email and any social media on my phone. And I've gone through waves of doing this. I have a whole.
At least silence the notifications selectively.
At
and
least,
stuff like that.
something. Yeah, it's my own personal journey of trying to create boundaries. But I usually go to it's
we're all on it,
it's
man.
a crazy world. Yeah, it's bad. Actually, another tangent, but as a marketer, I always feel like we're contributing to the demise of our brains through social media because social media is that's a whole nother conversation. But the only reason why social media platforms exist is because of people, looking to advertise.
Right. So we can feel good about that, I suppose. And all Taylor and I are trying to do, guys, is to not be the bad folks, the psychopaths using that empathy. We're trying to help forces for good.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
I didn't answer your question though. What I normally go to is Google News. Mm-hmm. So like on Google, I just Google has a great algorithm AI where they'll feed you articles based upon what you click on. And actually, it's a pretty good. I always find something interesting on there. So I always go through there and read.
Right, we have to turn that off, can't you?
Yeah. So I usually always. How about you? You didn't. I want to hear your TV
right?
show,
well,
and I want to hear what
you're right. I should reciprocate on some of these, but I didn't want to try to make it a backhanded way to be like, well, here's what I'm doing or whatever. But I often will check the news now. There's always. Despite myself, there's always something interesting that's going on in the news on a daily basis right now. So it's always worth clicking in. A lot of crazy stuff happening. That's no judgment on anything. It's just, I think, generally across the world in general.
Totally.
We're in sort of a crazy, unexpected, unknown space. That's all I'm trying to say. So I end up checking the news. I check the news a lot, and then oftentimes it's a to-do list or some certain like habits apps. Like this is what, where you left off from yesterday, all the stuff you said you need to remember to get done now that the next day is started, that type of thing. But yeah, all right. So then, is there a certain book that you're reading, sci-fi or otherwise? I'm crushing a lot of like sort of history audiobooks.
Nice.
Bit of a buff there. Listen to those stuff before I go to bed and things.
Nice. Yeah. Okay. So I think I mentioned earlier I'm a Christian, so I read the Bible. I'm reading a book on. Do you say what was that? Sorry.
I said good for you.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm reading some books in that whole genre. And then I also am listening to a book by Wendell Berry, who is a very fascinating author. He's a farmer by trade and an author, a prolific author. He's probably written 50 books. Amazing writer. He's just not only just a great like fiction writer and just stories, but he really connects. Basically, if you read his books, you'll basically hate the food industrial complex. You'll hate our farming practices. You'll hate our lifestyle of technology and consumerism. But he's a bunch of great. He's just really thoughtful and profound writer. So I'm reading a book by his.
I love author suggestions like that. I was very moved and influenced by Food Inc. Years ago. I know many people are, and they made a follow-on to that. So we've made some choices and changes in our lives. So that sounds like an interesting author for me to check out.
Check it out.
Flex your mind, man. We can't be thinking about all this like value engineering, geeky stuff all day.
100%. Yeah, and I love too. I think I learn more. I think there's a term, I forget what it's called, but it's like this idea of, it's a form of creativity of combining two kind of opposite ideas or two ideas that are not, you wouldn't normally combine, right? I think some of my best ideas come from like philosophy or religion or politics or areas that are like, have nothing to do with my profession, but can influence it, right? And so I think Wendell Berry is cool because he has a lot of philosophy that I think gives us, a worldview or a perspective that's interesting. And then I'm also reading, before bed, I always read usually sci-fi because I love like just, crazy imaginary stuff. And I'm reading Three Body Problem.
Started watching a couple episodes of that, of the live show version of that on Netflix. Seemed very intriguing. And again, just with I've got young kids at home like you do, so just I'm always like I get halfway through a show, halfway through an episode sometimes.
Yeah.
But what I managed to see before something happened, I had to turn it off and move on to the next thing. It was interesting.
Yeah.
I remember. Yeah,
very interesting.
Well, I think it's a good sort of, well, that show is one of them. And then we just started up the third season of White Lotus as well, which we're looking forward to. We enjoyed the first 2 seasons of that. Jennifer Coolidge, by the way, grew up in my town here where I live.
Oh, really?
In Norwell, Massachusetts. So fun fact for all you folks from the South Shore of Massachusetts.
She's hilarious.
Little claim to fame. But no, I think
no one quite like her. Talk about authenticity, right? Like, what a unique character, individual. Like
they are just themselves. Like you can't replicate that. And I think that's also what both you and I are trying to do. And I think what we're trying to say is like, bet on your own self creatively on the front end, because nobody else can replicate that. And people want to connect to you as a human. That is your unique DNA. It's one of the few things that cannot be replicated by anybody else or anything else. So let's lean into that. It's something that can't be taken away from us. At least not that I can think of. But as we ride out here, Taylor, my last sort of lightning round question for you is, what are you working on next, and how can we follow it?
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it. And so I'm obviously working on the Cyber GTM Alliance, which is the community, and I'm putting full-time effort into that and growing that rapidly. You can follow me on LinkedIn. I post content pretty regularly. I also have a YouTube channel that I did a podcast for a while. That's been on hold because of the community, but I have hundreds of hours of content on there. So I've talked to a lot of interesting people, and if you're cool, I can even post our conversation on there too.
By all means, yes.
Yeah, and show it to folks. I think a lot of these ideas, I've fleshed out tactically, a lot of what my whole journey from a strategy standpoint, and you'll see where I get a lot of my ideas from. Most of the stuff I come up with is something that I've borrowed, adapted, and contextualized to my world. YouTube is probably a place where you can get a lot of my content. And then you can also follow me at taylorwells.com. I can subscribe and get updates and stuff like that.
Sweet,
a couple different places.
Well, you have always been an inspiration for me, Taylor, for what you've done, and you've reminded me, and you remind us today that you can be yourself, you can try a few different things, you can let 1,000 flowers bloom, but ultimately the best thing is to just figure out what is it that you're really passionate about, what is sort of the go-to-market motion that most resonates with you plus the people you want to connect with, and go for it. And it's been a pleasure to watch you do it. And folks, I mean this, if you want to see what's possible, if you really just stick with it and be your own head of content, Taylor Wells is a great example. And that podcast you talked about and your web presence is a great example of what you could be doing. And Taylor Wells doesn't have a venture-backed budget here. He's doing it on his own. He's bootstrapping it like I am. And it's just a great inspirational example, man. So thanks for rapping with us here.
Super fun, Nick.
Let's continue to read widely, to keep an eye on everything, and then you can bring that into our content. I'm looking forward to it. So it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much again, Taylor.
Thanks, Nick. Really appreciate it.